Mr. Humphreys? Yep. Welcome. Make yourself at home.
Is my microphone working? Can you hear me? Thanks. I'm here today as a public health physician representing the Canterbury District Health Board. That is to say, I'm not here as Medical Officer of Health, which is, of course, a ministry appointment. And really, I'm just going to just summarise. I'm not going to read out our submission, but I'm just going to summarise some of the points. But before I start, I just kind of preamble it with some thoughts around the thoughts we've been having in the District Health Board around active transport. Many of you will be aware of the tragedy that affected Sharla Hairewa. She got killed. She was one of our employees. She was on her way to work. She was killed on a cycle path in Christchurch. What some of you are probably not aware of is the effect of not providing appropriate cycleways for people and the effect it's had on our surgical department. We have a number of surgeons who are very keen cyclists. They cycle at the weekends. They are fit people. They actually don't need to cycle to work to stay fit because they're pretty fit anyway. And over the last year or two, 4 of them have been injured cycling to work. They have been off work. Surgical time has been down by approximately 8 weeks per surgeon. Right? So that affects all of us. It affects everybody who wants an operation. We look at our waiting times, and it's a tragedy that people attempting to cycle to work are injured, and their consequence is that our relatives have to wait longer for operations. So it is very important that we separate cyclists from traffic, and I am always disappointed to see cyclists being put alongside traffic. It is dangerous and it affects our whole community, and it is still going on. I have seen new cycleways being put alongside roads when they could be separated quite easily and relatively cheaply. So to move on to our submission from the District Health Board, the summary of capital expenditure reflects an overall variance of 11.6 million from the 3-year plan, with the largest impact on funding allocated in the 3-year plan to improve the level of service. A footnote reveals that this is due to deferral of funding for key cycleways work to future years. The District Health Board opposes the significant variance from the 3-year plan for transport infrastructure improvements. This is because despite extending timeframes for completion of the 13 key cycleways project from 5 years to 8 years, we query why funds previously allocated will not be used to move forward with improvements to active transport infrastructure across the city. The District Health Board requests greater clarity overall regarding how much of the capital expenditure for transport improvements will go to active transport infrastructure. This is not actually specified in the annual plan. And finally, the District Health Board requests more information on the design standards to be used to create safe and effective pedestrian and cycling routes across the city, not just for the 13 key cycleways, as ongoing infrastructure repair and development continues, and how the Council will ensure that these standards are adhered to. That's all I have to say. Any questions?
Cycleways and cyclists are one side of it. How much of driver behaviour, knowledge is part of that as well? So, for instance, do you think that the education of drivers needs to be uplifted? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
The evidence from around the world shows that you only really generate safe cycling when enough cyclists are prepared to go on the road, and that it's engineering improvements that create that environment. Obviously, with more cyclists on the road, drivers do tend to look out for them more if there are more of them there. But if there are only a few cyclists, and if those cyclists are really just the gung-ho, lycra-bound cyclists, you will find that education doesn't make as much difference. It really has to be separate the cyclists from the cars. That means ordinary people, not the people like me. Actually, I ride to work in my suit. I don't wear lycra. I use it as a means of transport. I would like to see more people like me who are happily confident in riding to work, and that can only happen if you separate people from the cars.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. 3 questions, if I can, while I've got you here. So would you suggest that we need to relook at our cycle strategy?
Essentially, the District Health Board's position on all our submissions around transport issues is separate the bikes from the cars. And if they are not separated, it won't work. Yep. It will not generate enough confidence in people, particularly when you see headlines around people being killed on marked off cycleways. You know, they're not good enough. We need to see people separated, properly separated. It may only be by a curb, but cyclists don't kill pedestrians. Cars kill cyclists.
And pedestrians, yeah. Second question, this flooding issue, I mean, do you see that as a public health concern?
Flooding is always a public health concern, yeah.
In terms of the fact that, you know, some people are having their houses flooded regularly, not just with water, but with sewage.
Absolutely.
Should they still be in those houses, do you think?
Well, the answer is if a house is going to be flooded regularly, the answer is no. And the District Health Board have submitted on a number of applications in the past in flood risk areas, and we have opposed development in those areas because, no, people should not be living in houses that are regularly flooded.
Okay. And finally, the alcohol issue. Obviously, we're going to hear a submission later around paying for extra security around alcohol-riven areas. Who do you think is responsible for the problems that we have with alcohol at the moment?
Who do I think is responsible?
Because I'm trying to work
root cause, would you say, or are you talking about the
if somebody wants money from the council to provide, you know, some kind of extra security to deal with people struggling with. No. I mean, where does the responsibility lie? The
responsibility lies with the owner of the facility, not with the council. Sure, they're making money out of their facility. They should be the ones that provide the security, and they do, generally speaking. But if you're asking me who is at the root cause, Christchurch City Council produced an excellent local alcohol plan. It is regarded generally as one of the best researched. It has the greatest mandate of most local alcohol plans. And that local alcohol plan, like the Law Commission report, identified that the root cause of the problem is essentially off-licence sales. It's preloading that caused the problem. It's not our licensees who deliver an excellent service in this city. There are some of them that have to chase the drunken dollar at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. That shouldn't have to happen. They are competing with off-licence sales. Many people will preload up until midnight before they go out, and that's where our root problem lies.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. I note that the first comment on your submission table relates to rural water supplies, and we had a submitter earlier this morning suggesting to us that we should look at deferring the work on Banks Peninsula around water supply reticulation and sewerage reticulation. What would your comment be on that?
Well, essentially, the position of the Public Health Unit and the District Health Board is that reticulation is important and quality reticulation is important. So both for wastewater and for the water supply itself. So I don't think it should be deferred.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have an interest in footpaths, Alistair. In my previous existence, I saw some of the effects from a pastoral dimension of elderly people and their falls and what this led to at the end of the day in PMH. I just wonder if you could give us a, which is often their death actually, but are you able to give us a financial and kind of wider impact take on what happens to our older people when they do have a fall on broken footpaths and how much it's costing?
You're absolutely correct, Councillor, that a fall in an elderly person is often lethal. Not always, but it can be. And a lot of people do not realise the importance of maintenance and adherence to standards around footpaths. When you're a young man or woman, you know, you see a small change in a footpath and you think, what's the big deal? It's a couple of inches or an inch or two. Why is everybody worried about this? That inch can kill somebody, and it's very hard to understand that. I spent part of last year in a wheelchair, having broken my foot, falling down a hole from the earthquake, but also ensuring that footpaths are level is very important for people in wheelchairs. You would be surprised how much drag you get on a wheelchair from a very low gradient. So I agree. I think adherence to the quality of our footpaths is important. Those guidelines are there and they should be adhered to for the safety of our community.
One question, your submission particular emphasize cycleway facilities most important, and you against the $10.4 million deferral to the future financial year. But in here, your written submission also emphasized the public transport facility is also very, very important and essential. But regarding to the prioritize, you compare, this kind of two categories, which was more high prioritized if due to the council budget is limited?
Making a choice between the two, they are both important. Would I want to see one sacrificed completely for the other? The answer is no. Of course, our public transport provides a service for a different range of people than our cycleways do. But if our cycleways are safe, they will provide a facility for a much wider group in the population than they currently do. Because they're not safe, our elderly, our young are put off by the potential danger. These are then people who might have to choose a bus as an alternative, but the better, more comprehensive system and safer system you provide for everybody means there are more options. So it shouldn't really be a choice between one or the other. They are both important. The important thing is we should not have kilometre upon kilometre of lines of cars of a single person sitting in there. It is bad for the economy, it is bad for the health of our residents, and that is what we have. You only need to look at the traffic jams across the causeway in the morning or running north of Christchurch. This is not good for our economy, it is not good for the health of our people.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your detailed submission, quite a wide-ranging one. One issue that you haven't touched on, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, is around the issue of psychoactive substances. We, as a council, have gone through and looked at the policy that government has enabled us to consider, but I do wonder whether you've got any thoughts about, as a city, whether we should be much more proactive at looking at things like drug law reform, whether we should be advocating or even considering funding for addiction of treatment services for alcohol and drugs, but particularly around some of those psychoactive substances. And I'd be really interested just to hear your view on if there's anything else we can do from a non-regulatory point of view as a council to deal with that issue in our community.
In terms of dealing with addiction, I think it's if I heard it right, it's a kind offer for the City Council to support the District Health Board, and we should work together on this. But it is a responsibility of the District Health Board to provide those addiction services. I think the council was moving very sensibly towards a good LAPP, and I think the council was doing all the right things in terms of consultation. I'm not sure how far the council have got now with developing a detailed draft, but moving towards thinking very carefully about density and the effect of that on our community is important. There is no doubt in my mind that some of those substances, most of which are now re-banned, of course, before they're going to re-allow them to be used, appeared to be addictive and appeared to be causing harm to people, which is why the Ministry of Health have now decided to ban them. Hopefully the Ministry itself will review that and we will have less harm from those things. But I would hope that we would continue to work with the Council around addiction services, but it's primary responsibility of the DHB.
I was just going to ask you about the cycleways that we've already put in around Ilam, around the university, separated. Do you see those working? Are you happy with that sort of
I think
design?
they're excellent. Yep, I'm a cyclist. I've ridden down those. They're not in my part of the city, but those kind of separated cycleways make you feel confident when you come down them. They do take a little bit of getting used to. For some people who've not been used to the kind of driveway issue, but they are actually safer and they protect you from the moving traffic. There could be, they may be difficult in some circumstances to have that full separation, but at the very least there should always be a curbway between the cars and the bikes. So sometimes cycleways will need to share with pedestrians. I think it's always far better that cyclists share with pedestrians than cyclists share with cars. So where there's an option, narrow the road and make the pavement wider.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Back to flooding. A couple of the questions I was given around, especially the Heathcote area, is following the flood when we've got silt and effluent on the roads. How important is it to get that cleaned up before it dries and becomes dust? Because is there a significant health issue once it is dust, I guess?
The bacteria in silt, if it's contaminated, can sporulate. It can form spores and survive in dry conditions. So it is important to clean it up. It is the council responsibility to clean up contaminated silt, and they should be doing that promptly. If it does blow around, yes, it can cause a problem for people. Not so much inhaling it, but certainly coming into contact with it. There is certainly a theoretical risk. I don't have data on, how many people get infected from sewage-contaminated dust blowing around, but it's a real threat.
So when we talk with our flooding task force, we should instill in them that is a priority to clean those streets up from the silt, etc., before it dries. You would agree with that?
Yeah, I would say it needs to be cleaned as promptly as possible. It may not be... you can imagine on a hot summer's day a flooding and it will dry out very quickly. I would suggest that just cleaning it promptly is important. Putting hard and fast conditions on may be a little difficult to comply with.
Data on sort of the health data for Christchurch people at the moment, and where does that go to in relation to our sort of policy making?
We do have data on Christchurch people. We have data on admissions. We have data on infectious disease rates. We, as a public health unit, can analyse any aspect of data that any organisation is interested in, and we do work with the council in many different areas where we share our data with the council.
Okay.
If there were specific issues that you were interested in, or any of your staff were interested in, it would be very easy for them to approach us, and we will both produce the data but also analyse it if that is required. That's an important role for the public health unit. Well, you can contact me, but essentially, depending on the area you're looking at, there will always be a manager and a public health physician working in partnership in the public health unit who your staff will have a relationship with, and they can access it through them.
Just quickly, and I'm sorry to bounce you backwards and forwards, back to psychoactive substances.
Yes.
We were grappling with the concept of only allowing these to be sold in the central city.
Yes.
And you mentioned something about density
Yes.
of these sites.
Mm.
Do you see that, if we only allow it to be sold in the central city, as a problem by having all those outlets being sold in one space? Understanding that each of these facilities have about 300 customers a day.
Yes. The issue is that you need to work out, and I understand the council was going to do some work on this, exactly how many facilities you would allow. So you've got to look at how the spacing between them, you know, whether it's 300 metres and how many therefore would fit within the frame. And I always say within the frame, not within the 4 avenues, because as a resident of the 4 avenues, I would not want to see psychoactive substance shop on my street, but the frame is clearly defined. So let's talk about the frame. The problem has been that, of course, there are some retail outlets that have already been licensed by the ministry, not necessarily with our support, outside of that. Now, have they generated a dependency in that community, Hornby, for example, for these substances? Possible they have. What happens if you come July, you then say, right, well, we're going to bring you all into the central city? It's an issue for us all to think about as a community. Those people would have to travel into town to get those substances they want. We are told they're not dependent, but they are. You know, they will go in and get those. So I think careful work by the council looking at how many we can reasonably have within the frame is useful work. And I think that's I would support that. Okay, you're welcome.